All right, so welcome everyone to our next installment in the StarNet webinar series. This month's topic is the total eclipse of 2017, titled The Outreach Event of the Decade, which I think is my favorite title we've had so far, so that was great. We have had one other eclipse webinar that was done a couple months ago. You can find the transcript of that on our website, and we will hopefully have more in the future as we get prepared for next year's event. Those of you who just joined us, one more time, if you have any questions for the presenters, please put those in the chat box. We will get to them at the end of the presentation, or if something seems very relevant to the slide we're on, we'll go ahead and interrupt. If you would like to ask a question out loud because your question is too complicated for the chat box, let me know in the chat and I'll unmute you, or you can use the little indicator button, which is that thought bubble that has a check mark in it. You can use that and hit the laughter button, and that will remind me I need to come back and unmute you at some point in the future. So without further ado then, I am going to go ahead and pass the ball off to Dr. Fracknoy here, who will get us started. And again, if you have any questions or if you're having any trouble with your audio or any other technology, let me know in the chat. I will be monitoring that throughout. All right, Andrew, you should be able to control the slides now.
All right, and you're passing on the ball to me. Thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to welcome everybody to this cosmic webinar. My name is Andrew Fracknoy. I'm the chair of the astronomy department at Foothill College near San Francisco. I do quite a bit of work in public outreach. I'm an author who has written both textbooks and popular books, and now recently even some science fiction. And my hobby is making bibliographies, which we'll come back to. Now, most groups I talk to, I have to make an embarrassed joke at this point about my hobby being making bibliographies. But with this audience of librarians, this is, I think, the first audience where I'm not apologizing in the least for that hobby. So let me tell you today about the very exciting event that's coming up. Many of you have heard about it in outline, but we want to fill in some of the details. On August 21st, 2017, there's going to be a total eclipse of the sun visible from one country and one country only, and that's the United States. So people are already starting to call this the all-American eclipse. And it's going to be an eclipse of the sun where the sun is covered, and we'll talk more about what happens during that. But it will be visible only in some states. And so one of the first things I want to tell you is where the eclipse of the sun will be a total eclipse, where the sun is completely covered, and where it will be a partial eclipse of the sun. Let's begin by talking about what these eclipses are about. It's an amazing coincidence that from Earth, if we look up at the sky, the moon and the sun are the same size. Now, the sun is much bigger, but it's further away. The moon is smaller, but it's closer. And remarkably, it works out so that the moon can exactly cover the sun since they're the same size. This is not true from any other planet. Here I actually have a picture from Mars taken by one of our robot cars on Mars. And here's the pathetic little moon of Mars trying to cover up the sun and trying to make an eclipse, and you can see it fails miserably. The sun is not eclipsed from Mars or any other world. When we do have an eclipse, it is absolutely spectacular in its total phase. This is the kind of thing you see. The beautiful outer atmosphere of the sun, which is too faint to see when the sun is shining, suddenly appears. The sky goes dark, the stars come out, animals are terribly confused about how it got to be night in the middle of the day, and it is really a once-in-a-lifetime experience to see this darkening of the sky and the going away of most of the sun during the course of an ordinary day. And so for those people who will be in the eclipse path or will be able to travel in August to the eclipse path, to the small zone where it's total, this will be amazing. For the rest of us, there'll still be a partial eclipse of the sun, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So let's just make sure everybody's with the picture of what's happening. Here's a little cartoon showing the situation. The moon gets between the Earth and the sun, and a dark shadow makes a cone, which puts a spot of darkness on the face of the Earth. If you are in that spot, then you see the sun completely covered. If you're somewhere else besides that single dark spot, then you see only part of the sun covered, and the sun is still dangerous to look at that point. So this dark spot moves as the Earth and the moon move during the course of an hour or an hour and a half. The spot moves, and in this case, the spot will move across our country from the West Coast to the East Coast. Here's a map that shows you where the eclipse will be total. So here you see the gray area. That's where, if you're in that area, you will be under the dark spot where you will see the moon completely covered. And you can see it starts on a beach in Oregon, moves across the country until it ends on a beach in South Carolina. It's interesting that this particular eclipse path includes no really large cities. It does go over a little part of St. Louis. The largest city that's in the eclipse path is Nashville. But other than that, all the large cities of the United States will miss out. So we're calling this a rural eclipse. That means you'll need to be in a smaller town usually, or a national or state park when you're enjoying the eclipse on the path. Everyone else in the United States and everyone else in North America will see a partial eclipse. Now, let me just show you the states where the eclipse will be total. I'll give you a minute to look at that. Not all of each state, but just some part of each state, as you saw on the previous map, will experience a total eclipse. Here, for example, just to give you, maps are available, and we're going to give you a bibliography, of course, by the end of this program. And maps are available for free on the web like this, so they show exactly where you need to go to see the eclipse. And the interesting thing you need to know is that the closer you are to the center of this eclipse path, the longer the experience of the sun being blotted out completely will last, the longer the total eclipse. So you can see here that in Oregon, if you're near the center of the path, it will last more than 2 minutes. But if you're on the edge of the path, you'll only have 1 minute to enjoy the eclipse. And so if people are planning where to go, that's an important consideration to keep in mind. It's best to be near the center of the eclipse shadow. Everyone else will see a partial eclipse. And here we have a beautiful photograph of a partial eclipse of the sun. The problem is that when you're looking at the sun, even when some of it's covered, it's extremely dangerous to look at the sun without proper protection. And so one of the things that we're going to be talking about is how we can obtain or make sure we give our patrons protection from the sun. Here are the population statistics of who will be able to see the partial eclipse of the sun. And you can see that when you add up the numbers, about 500 million people will be able to view the partial eclipse on August 21, 2017. And even for an astronomer, that's an astoundingly large number. How are we going to get good information? How are we going to get proper protection to all those people in all those countries, and particularly for those of us working in the United States, to the entire population of the United States in 2017? And we've concluded, and that's what we're doing with this webinar, that libraries are likely to be the single best resource this country has for effective eclipse outreach. And we're hoping that all of you will participate in making sure that the correct kind of information gets to your patrons and gets to your community. And we'll talk more about community outreach in a later part of the discussion. All right, let me go on to the next slide. These are the kinds of glasses that will protect you. They're made of paper with an insert of a very special kind of plastic, which cuts out most of the light and the ultraviolet of the sun, making it safe to look at the sun. in both. These glasses are not very expensive. You'll need to order them way in advance because everybody and their cousin will be ordering them at the last minute. And we'll talk later about how this StarNet program is going to make Eclipse classes available to participating libraries. If you need to order your own, I've put up here, there are two companies that are especially useful because they make certified glasses that have been safety checked, and that's American Paper Optics and Rainbow Symphony. Both of these you'll have in the materials that will be referring you to. These names and these URLs will be repeated many times, so you don't need to rush and write them down. I wanted to show you the circumstances of the eclipse just to give you the flavor of what's happening. Here are the largest cities in the United States and what they're going to see. So I'm particularly interested in the last column in this case, which is what percent of the sun's area will be covered in the large cities. And you can see it's pretty good all over the United States. New York City, 71% of the sun will be covered. In Chicago, 87%. San Francisco, where I am, will have 76%. And in Washington, D.C., the cover-up will be about 81%. And I think that's pretty typical for the cover-up that goes on in Washington. Again, these will be in the materials that you'll have access to, so you don't need to be thinking about copying any of this information down. Here's a little chart we made that shows you the cities where the eclipse will be total. And you can see that with the exception of Nashville, Tennessee, these are not large cities at all. And if you look at the second and third column, that tells you where the total eclipse starts and ends. When it starts and ends. It's about 2 minutes for most places. This is not a very long eclipse, but it's a wonderfully accessible eclipse for the United States. Now, in addition to worrying about being in the eclipse path, both for those trying to get to see the total eclipse and for those trying to show the partial eclipse in their library, weather is going to play a big role. August is typically a time when the United States has cloud cover, and it's very possible that on that day, if the clouds are too thick, the sun won't be visible and your community will miss the entire spectacle. So people are already making predictions. There are websites where we keep track of August weather for the cities along the eclipse path and for other cities as well. And again, we'll have references to these websites in the material that you can receive. But Jay Anderson, whose name you see in the left corner, is kind of the world's expert on eclipse weather. He's a meteorologist who for years has been keeping track of the weather along eclipse paths. And so he's making predictions. Here's a chart where you can see on the left-hand side the percentage cloud cover, and on the horizontal axis, you see the various locations in the United States. So you can see the lower this red curve goes, the less likely you are to be clouded out. So for example, Madras, Oregon is a better place to see it than Wind River, Wyoming, because in Wind River, the cloud cover is 70% likelihood, whereas in Madras, it's less than 40%. But that's another factor that people who are eclipse chasers will be paying a lot of attention to. What's the expected weather for that part of August, looking back through history? All right. If the weather turns bad, lots and lots of people who've planned for weeks and weeks to go see the eclipse are going to try to move. And that will be a logistical nightmare for the civil authorities in those small towns, what to do if suddenly, because of cloud cover, hundreds, thousands of people try to move to another location. But for those of us safely in libraries, that will probably not be a big deal. So let me now say a word or two about what we're going to talk about in the rest of the session today. What we want to do is to begin to set the scene for you, as I hope I've done. We will have another webinar later on specific techniques for safe viewing. But what we want to do is to begin to give you some of the resources that you'll need to start planning for the eclipse. And one thing I've put together is a bibliography, surprise, surprise, about eclipses in general and about this particular eclipse. And you can find that at this web address. It's part of the work of the nonprofit Astronomical Society of the Pacific. At www.astrosociety.org/eclipse, you will find links and information about books, articles, websites, maps, interdisciplinary approaches. If you have patrons who are interested in stamp collecting in eclipses or literature in eclipses, there's lots of information on how to get to good resources in this listing. And I know that the StarNet people will make this URL available to you as well. And as you'll hear later, Dennis and I have written a book for educators on how to prepare classes for the eclipse. And part of this book, which is published by the nonprofit National Science Teachers Association, part of this book called Solar Science includes a guide to the eclipse, which has all these maps and charts that I was showing you and information about where to go and so forth, and safe viewing. So this insert has been made into an 8-page PDF booklet, which is available free of charge from the National Science Teachers Association. And we've given you at the bottom of this slide 2 URLs that you can go to. The first one takes you directly to the PDF. The other one takes you to a page of resources for our book, where you can then link to this PDF booklet. But if you find this booklet useful, it's not copyrighted in any way, and we are encouraging you to send the URL to anyone in your library, to make printed copies available, whatever is useful for you. We're happy to make this basic information about the eclipse available to as many people as possible. The idea of our working with libraries is that we hope you'll begin soon enough so that by the time the media get around to discovering this eclipse, which probably won't be for many of them until the summer of next year, you will be prepared to have resources available to be able to send people to the right information, and perhaps even to start scheduling sessions or discussions within the library. And Dennis is going to talk about that in a minute. We hope among the resources that you will be looking at might be this book, which is coming in early 2017. Dennis and I have written again for the nonprofit National Science Teachers Association, a children's book, roughly at the 4th to 5th grade level, on eclipses when the sun goes dark. And we hope that that's something that you can include in the resources that you make available to your patrons. So that's a very quick introduction to the eclipse. I know there'll be questions about your particular location or about other things related to the eclipse, and we'll be glad to take those questions at the end of the program. But now I think we're going to move on, and Annie, you're going to take the next part.
Absolutely, just stealing the little presenter ball back from you there. All right, so I just want to quickly, before we give Dennis a shot here to talk, I wanted to talk really quickly about some of the resources that are going to be available to you guys through the StarNet program. All of these resources are free. We just ask that you register on our events page that you see here on this slide. Again, all of these URLs will be available on the slide at the end of the webinar, so you don't need to bother scribbling this down right now. So you see down here on the right, that is the list of 1,100 libraries that have already registered to be part of this event. That means all of those libraries are getting those 50 free solar glasses, which we all know aren't the cheapest thing in the world. So please, especially you guys see that little very dead area that also happens to be right along the path of totality. If any of you live in that area, we'd love to see some more registrations there. I think the Midwest is pretty well covered. But certainly, we're planning on getting up to 2,000 libraries across the country registering, and you guys will all be able to work together, sharing what you're doing to prepare for this event, any promotional materials that you have, and we'll be helping you guys out with that as well. This next slide here just talks a little bit about, once you register, what resources you've gained access to. I do want to make it clear, we're not trying to prevent anyone from getting these things. We just want to make sure, because of our NASA funding, we're able to report back to the agency exactly how many libraries we're using these things, who those libraries are, what types of audiences they're serving. So putting this behind a little registration wall, which is a very low bar, I hope, is one of the ways we're doing that. If for some reason you want or need to see any of this before registering, just drop me an email and I'll be able to walk you guys through some of this as well. So don't feel like this is a hard wall here. So once you have registered, though, you will gain access to royalty-free images and videos for use in your programming and promotion. Once you get to this website, any image that you see on there is free and clear for you guys to use in your promotion. You don't need to ask for our permission. All of them have the appropriate credits on them, and they all are high res. So shouldn't be any problems there. We will also be creating a media template package. So this includes things like a press release, a PSA, a community letter, and a media alert template. Normally, we've seen in the past people not actually taking very much advantage of that community letter. I do want to promote that as a great way if you've got local partners, or potential partners rather, that you haven't been working with and you would really love to start talking to those people. This letter is a very simple, easy way. You don't need to pick up the telephone to let them know the great things that you're doing at the library and that they can be part of that. We've found in the past there are a lot of community members and organizations who want to work with the library, but they're just as shy about talking to you guys as you are about talking to them. So this is our attempt to make that process a little bit easier. We will also have on that website principal posters from some of our Space Science Institute space science exhibits, things about eclipses, about the science behind the solar corona, and other fancy sun words that you guys are going to hear as we get through this. That way you're not having to constantly define these things for your patrons. You can print out a poster, print out some postcards, and have all that information ready for everybody. This image down here at the bottom of the page is just a quick preview of some of the stuff that's on the page. So there's some of the videos from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. We've got some quick solar eclipse FAQs. I don't want to make it seem like we've developed all this ourselves. Most of this we've pulled from our NASA, NSTA, and other partners. You can consider this kind of a clearinghouse of the materials we think will be useful to you in the library. And again, all you need to do to get access to these resources is register as the host of an Eclipse event on our Eclipse site. You do not need to have the specifics of the event ready yet. You can just tell us that you're planning on doing it. And then once you know what that event is and you can give us a link to your calendar or something, then we'll be able to send you those glasses. But all we need to know is that you're planning on doing it to get you access to this site. A resource that is actually available today to everybody is our StarNet Eclipse forum. This is not on that special secret hidden site. This is just on our main StarNet site. This is an opportunity. If you're not sure what you want to do to participate in the Eclipse, you can go to this site right now and participate in the forum. The two subjects we have up there right now are what to do if you're clouded out, which I know sounds sad, but inevitably with as many of you as there are registered, somebody's not going to see the Eclipse. And that's okay. There are plenty of other things you can do, and there are plenty of live feeds so that you can still see the event happening in various other places. We also have a topic down there for event logistics. The tongue-in-cheek, but actually very important one I posted in there yesterday was porta potty companies are actually selling out on the day. And if you don't want everybody in your parking lot to be using your facilities, you best contact them. So this is the kind of thing, guys, if you want to get more information before you register, I'm encouraging everybody after this discussion to go post in there. Dennis and Andy, too, feel free to go post in our forum. I do want to make it clear, though, because we do use the word register a few times, registering for the eclipse is different than registering on our website. Registering on our website just gives you the permission to post and comment on the forums. So those are two different processes. Again, if you have any questions about them, don't hesitate to ask me. I know we are throwing around a lot of the same words to mean different things here. Just take a quick look at the chat right now, because I'm imagining people have questions. Yes, so people are asking, if we're signed into this webinar, are we registered? And yes and no. Some of you are. Some of you are already on my list of 1,100 libraries. I know others of you got the link to this webinar from a couple different listservs. So if you have not filled out a form on our website saying that you plan on hosting an Eclipse event, then no, you are not registered. You might be registered for our newsletter, and that's how you've heard about this as well. So there's a couple of different things. But if you have not, on the Eclipse site, filled out a form saying, yes, we're doing an event, that's what you need to do to get involved in all of this process. Someone else also asks, to register, does it need to be part of a viewing party, or could it be an informational program that takes place before the actual eclipse? Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We would love to hear about those events too. And certainly what you could plan to do then is have an informational event about how people can safely do it and then pass out those glasses for them to use at another point. I am absolutely fine with that process. So if you guys have any more questions about the StarNet piece, let's go ahead and save those for the end. You can type them in the chat box, but I'll answer a little bit later here. And I believe I am now going to pass the ball of power over to Dennis, who's going to continue our conversation.
Thank you, Annie. I appreciate your passing the ball over to me. And I too want to thank everybody for joining us. I'm Dennis Schatz. I'm the Senior Advisor at the Pacific Science Center, a public science museum in Seattle, Washington. And as Andy mentioned, and the co-author with him on the solar science book. And my plan is to talk a little bit about resources available to you, and then to really talk about partnerships and how to make the most of this eclipse and to inform the public about what will be happening. This is the front cover of the solar science book, which is a resource book for teachers, but it really is designed for people in both in-school and out-of-school learning situations. And if you're a programming librarian and you do public programs, you will find that there's a number of activities in here that would be quite appropriate to help explain what's happening when the solar eclipse occurs, why it's total in some places, partial in another, what's actually happening, why is it unusual, why is this the first solar eclipse in almost 40 years in the United States, total solar eclipse in the United States, and why do people spend $10,000 and travel 10,000 miles to see a total solar eclipse? So there's a number of activities that work quite appropriately. And as Andy mentioned, there will be a companion for younger readers. Again, depending on the reading level and so on, I think of it as appropriate for the 9 to 12-year-old youth, and hopefully will be quite appropriate for what you want to do in your library. I already pointed out the number of activities that are in the solar science, and here you'll see there's one chapter, chapter 4, that is specifically about the sun, the moon, and the earth together, phases of the moon, eclipses, and more. And this is really the first 4 or 5 activities are the ones that you want to look at as you think about programming for your patrons. Andy already mentioned this too, but I want to reiterate it and say a little bit more about what's in it. It's this 8-page insert that's part of solar science. Again, it's free distribution, NSTA, although it's available from NSTA, it can be distributed widely, and it's downloadable for free. And you have the website at the bottom in order to find it. It gives some of the basic information that Andy presented about what happens during the eclipse, where it'll be total, where it'll be partial. In addition, the other thing it has, which was really critical, are safe viewing techniques. This is probably the greatest asset that libraries can provide for the public. There's all these myths about when it's dangerous, when it's not dangerous, do I have to stay inside, what's going to happen? And you saw some of the opportunities for safe viewing in Andy's slides. He showed a whole group of people using those glasses that you can purchase relatively inexpensively. That's one way to do it, but there are even cheaper ways to look at it. This is a simple pinhole projector where you have two pieces of cardboard, a piece of aluminum foil with a hole in it, making a pinhole projector. And you get an image of the sun on the second piece of cardboard. And of course, when the sun's uncovered, it's just a round image of the sun. But during the eclipse, you'll get to see a partial phase. So this is a really easy thing. So we are envisioning at the Science Center that we're going to have weekend, I'll call them craft events for at least a month, if not longer, leading up to the eclipse, where people can make these, take them home, and be ready for the eclipse on August 21st. This is something, again, you might think about. How do you help your patrons make these? What's the programming where you can do this sort of thing? Very inexpensive. And of course, if you want to get glasses, you can do that. You can also think of that as a fundraiser. You don't have to give them away, but you could sell them to help support the Friends of the Library kind of thing. Now, this is one of the simpler things. There's other kinds of techniques that are talked about in the book. So here's a little more complicated way. With a pair of binoculars, you can actually project a larger image of the sun through the binoculars, or if you had a telescope. So you'll see within this 8-page resource lots of information about safe viewing techniques, in addition to what's going to be happening around the country in terms of timing of the eclipse. So we hope that you'll find that booklet very useful. One thing that you'll want to consider as you move on to thinking about this August 21st event, some of you I'm sure have already thought about this. It's an interesting time, August 21st. In our informal surveys, Andy and I have discovered about half the schools will be in session and about half the schools won't be in session. So one thing will be to figure out what's happening in your area and what does that mean about resources and programming that you might want to do. The 21st of August actually be for many places will be the first day of school. So we certainly, in talking with teachers, are saying it's important for them to do things in the spring of 2017 because they won't have time to deal with it in the first day of school. And certainly if school doesn't start until September, then you'll have to certainly prepare your students. But keeping this in mind about who will be around, how to serve your patrons will be a very important thing to do. And of course, we think, and I'm sure many of you also think, a key aspect of providing programming is not, I have to do it all myself. You shouldn't have to do that. There are many partners out there that are quite appropriate for you to partner with. And actually, I think Annie is going to put up a poll at this point to ask you if you are partnering with any of these groups already. And while you're answering that, I'm going to go on and talk about some of them and how you can get access and find out more about them. So we think that a solution, a goal to effective learning about the eclipse and safe viewing techniques is not to do it all yourself, but identify those people that are already have expertise and equipment to do it for you, if you want to put it that way, or maybe to do it with you, probably a better way to look at it. So the first one, you can see there are science centers, nature centers, these nonprofits like Pacific Science Center that are available. A lot of teachers that we have talked with are thinking about how do they use their students to be resources to the community. So that will be an important one. Amateur astronomy groups. We'll talk more about that later. Community college instructors, university instructors. There's a whole set of what are called ambassadors. American Astronomical Society has a set of ambassadors that do public outreach, as well as NASA's solar system ambassadors. So we'll mention that later. And of course, your local planetarium, which might be in your science center. Let me say a little bit more about some of these. We'll continue to update you with links, groups that are doing work. This is probably the best way to link with amateur astronomers. You may already have your link to amateur astronomers. But if you look at this map with all its icons on it, you'll notice there's also that big hole that Annie was talking about in the kind of between the mountain states and the West Coast, which because it's very rural, it's hard to find people that are doing amateur astronomy. But if you don't have a connection to your amateur astronomers, go to the Night Sky Network. You can just Google Night Sky Network and you'll come up with this map, find if there's an amateur club near you, and encourage them to participate in your programs. Now, many people, of course, will say they're all going to be at totality. They're going to be down in Madras, Oregon, or South Carolina seeing totality. Well, that's true on the day of the eclipse, but I think it's very important to point out that it's not the events on the day of the eclipse that are as important as the weeks leading up to it. Most people are going to be at home or at work. What we want to be able to do is for them to have the tools, the glasses, the pieces of cardboard with the pinhole projector, so they can just go outside no matter where they are and make good observations. So the key thing is to get the amateur astronomers involved in programming leading up to the eclipse and realize they're going to be gone on the day of the eclipse. And again, you may not have as much programming actually at your library on the day of the eclipse. It's that time leading up to it that's really important. If you want to find out what science centers are nearby, you again probably know this, but if you don't, you can go to the Association of Science Technology Centers. You can see their web address here. It's a pretty easy one. Again, if you just Google the name, you'll find their address pretty quickly. And they too have a place where you go and find any science center. And sometimes you'd be amazed how many small towns have science centers. So even though you may feel, oh, it's only those big science centers like Pacific Science Center or Franklin Institute or Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, you'll find there's plenty around in Bemidji, Minnesota, Billings, Montana, and so on. So keep that in mind as a good resource to get to science and technology centers, science centers, but also a lot of ways to get to planetariums. If you're really into this eclipse and you want to learn more about different ways to engage with people around the eclipse, let me suggest that the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, which was mentioned earlier, is offering a conference specifically geared to it on December 8th and 9th in St. Louis. So if this interests you, go to the Astronomical Society of the Pacific site and look at what the program is going to be. Finally, but I also have to mention something that's happening but isn't yet available to everybody. And that is the American Astronomical Society has funding from NSF to make mini grants available and it's not to necessarily just to libraries, but to programs that will engage underserved populations. So if you think that this might be appropriate, keep that website in mind, and we anticipate certainly by the end of the year, hopefully by the end of the month, this website will be live and you'll be able to look and see if seeking funding from American Astronomical Society will be appropriate in order to serve an underserved population in your area. I should point out that we will be providing more of these kinds of links in future webinars. In addition, we'll be putting it up on the forum, so I don't have a link for either the Solar System ambassadors or the AAS ambassadors. You know, obviously, the AAS ambassadors are connected to the same program, the same organization. We will be putting those up for you to peruse in the future. In addition, I only casually talked about safe viewing techniques. We anticipate one of the future webinars will specifically talk about all of the ways in which you can view the eclipse safely. My favorite and kind of cute one is that you can take an umbrella and poke a hole in it and put it on the ground, and you get a nice little pinhole projector of the image on the ground. And there's lots of ways in which to view the eclipse safely. And we'll talk more about if you're in totality, when is it safe to start looking directly at the sun, and when you have to put the glasses on or start looking indirectly. So we hope that you will think about partners, think about programming that will last over a period of time, and most important, happen before the eclipse occurs, so people will be prepared no matter where they are. We can only say we wish you clear skies on August 21st. So for Andy and myself, we thank you for being part of this webinar. I'm going to turn it back over to Annie to deal with questions.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. That was very informative. All right, everybody. So as promised, all of those URLs you were furiously scribbling, they're on the screen now. If you just want to take a picture with your phone, that's fine. Otherwise, these will all be available within the next 24 hours on our website. So with all that said, does anyone have any questions for Dennis or Andy? You can either put them in the chat box or indicate in the chat box that you want me to unmute you if it's a complicated question. You guys did such a good job. There are 0 questions. We're all totally prepared for the eclipse now.
Well, let's give people a minute to think. And,
what's the fun in that?
And type. But I think one of the things that we want to emphasize is that, as Dennis said, I think for many people in libraries and other settings, it's a little intimidating if you don't know much astronomy. That you might say, wow, that's a big, it's one thing to help our patrons one-on-one, but to organize community events on this topic, which I don't know a lot about, that's a little bit more intimidating. So one of the things we're hoping to do through this wonderful StarNet organization is to make sure that you have partners available. That's what Dennis was saying, that if you can rely on partners in your community, community college instructors, amateur astronomers, people from museums who might come to the library and do some training for your staff or to simply make public programs available, that would certainly make your task easier. And that's what I hope we can encourage through the interaction of these different groups and the StarNet Libraries Network.
You know, I also saw there was a couple questions under the question and answers about, are there maps or information about specific timing for a given location? And if you get that 8-page insert, you'll find a map, and actually Andy showed a non-interactive one, but a website that's interactive. So you can go to a website that has a map of the United States, and you can click on any location to find out when does the partial eclipse start, when does totality start if you're in totality, when does it end, and so on. So that interactive map is very useful, and the URL is in that 8-page handout.
And I should add, it's also in the Astro Society Eclipse Resource Guide. There's a special section to various maps. One of the slightly confusing things about those maps is that it gives the times in universal time, which is the time in London, England, which is kind of the astronomical one time that a lot of astronomers use. And so there's usually a little box that helps you convert on those maps from universal time to your local time. But NASA is working on a map and a website where they're going to have this available in local time. So again, we'll keep you informed. As more sources develop, we'll make sure that it gets posted to the forum and that you're all aware of where to go to get that kind of information. But there are also individual local maps, as Dennis said, of each state. I showed you one for Oregon, but if you go to the Great American Eclipse website or any of the websites that we recommend, you'll be able to get individual maps and see where the eclipse is best in each state.
Excellent. Dennis and Andy, a couple people have mentioned, since they are not in the full path, that they might not want to be doing a program. Could you guys talk a little bit about the difference between the two and why people might still want to program if they're off path?
Sure. I'd be happy to. Actually, I think it's even more important to do programming where you're not in the path, because of the whole issue of safety. It'll be very important for people to know what are the safe viewing techniques. So that, and certainly they'll want to know what time is it going to happen, and what percent of coverage it's going to be. So I think it's plus everybody, it'll be on the web. I mean, this will be the astronomical event of the decade. I think the news throughout the day, both in social media and cable news and everything, will be about this eclipse. So having programming related to it, I think, is really critical. It's also a way to make, from my perspective, whether it's the Science Center for us, it would be, you know, if we're the Science Center and we didn't do some programming around it, people would say, gee, here's this big event. And I feel sort of the same way about libraries. Here's an event that's going to impact people in the community, that there ought to be information. Now, maybe it's different level for different places, but I think it's absolutely critical to make use of this. And one last comment, it's a great way to develop an interest in science and science topics that we are always worried about developing that kind of interest, and this is going to be a great opportunity to develop that.
So, and let me add on to that just a little bit. So I think there'll be a lot of confusion in the media about the whole issue of how to view this eclipse. And the focus will be on the total eclipse, which will be visible only in 5% of the United States. So for 95% of the United States, there'll be this confusion. Well, wait a minute, we're not in the past. Is it important? Should we try to look at it? How do we look at it? And so having information early enough so when this hits the media, your patrons will know which is which. What's the difference between a total eclipse or partial eclipse, and how do you protect your eyes in looking at both of them, or each of them, or any of them? That will be a very good public service, because by the time it gets onto the media, there'll be brief announcements, there'll be lots of misinformation out there. There will be doctors saying, don't ever look at an eclipse, it'll really hurt your eyes. And so making sure that people have correct information will be a real service to your community.
I noticed that Paul Duesenberry at StarNet just noted that they'll be live streaming the total eclipse. So there's another way in which, you know, even though you're not in totality, that on the day of the eclipse, to have a place in a programming space where you'll have people can come in and actually see the total eclipse and then go out, see the partial eclipse, come back in. Well, it only lasts 2 minutes, but of course, totality, they'll be showing totality from many different sites across the country. So I think that's another way in which to really engage the public, is by that live streaming that will occur. And I'm going to switch a little bit. I saw a question about will the solar eclipse affect the International Space Station? There is some discussion, not that it'll affect the International Space Station, but to have the International Space Station get views of the eclipse down on the Earth. So certainly at times in its orbit, of course, sometimes it's on the other side of the Earth, it will be able to take photographs and maybe even videos of the path streaming across the United States. So that actually will be an exciting thing. And I assume that will be streamed too. So you'll be able to see the shadow of the Earth, shadow of the moon pass across parts of the Earth.
And there'll be a number of other citizen science projects as well. We know that Google and NASA and a number of other places are working together to make a mega movie, a live, stitched together movie of the eclipse as seen from the ground as the path moves across the United States. And the California Academy of Sciences is doing a How Do Animals React survey, where naturalists and citizen scientists can see the effect of the eclipse on animals, and then they'll be, again, putting together all the different results from around the country of how the total eclipse affected the animals that were under the dark shadow.
And we'll be talking more about these in future webinars. We didn't include it here because of time limits, but if we hear about more citizen science and other streaming events and so on, we'll make sure that people know about them.
All right, so it looks like people are starting to stream off to get to other events, which is absolutely fine. If anyone has any more questions, we'll stay on for just a second here. Go ahead and add them in the chat. Otherwise, as I mentioned, all of these slides and the chat summary will be available on our website within 24 hours. That's the starnetlibraries.org site under Webinar Archive. Thank you all so much for participating. Thank you to Dennis and Andy for sharing all of this great information. And we hope you guys do join us for our future webinars. Some of the topics Dennis and Andy talked about, maybe a little bit about preparing for the eclipse as far as logistics and things, and also hands-on activities that can be done while you're waiting. So do stay tuned for all of that and pay attention to our newsletter. That's where you'll get that information.
Right. And maybe we should also say that this, from our perspective, this entire StarNet network is an incredible resource. And if you know other libraries and other librarians who should become involved, who will appreciate knowing about the StarNet network, please share this information with other libraries. We'd love to be able to provide this information to as many libraries across the country as possible.
Absolutely. Oh, I just had simultaneously 2 private questions asking me if I could go over the registration process again. So anyone else who already has that down, feel free to go. I'm just going to go over that really quickly for these 2 folks. So the registration process for the Eclipse is if you go to starnetlibraries.org and then under events, there is a 2017 Eclipse page. There is a registration form on there. All you need to do in that form is let us know that you're planning on doing an Eclipse event, telling us a little bit about what that idea might be, but you do not have to have a calendar linked to it yet. That will add you to our list for our Eclipse newsletter, and also we'll send you that link to that resource site. And then once we get a little bit further down the road and you know what your event's going to be, then we'll ask you to send us a calendar link to that, and that's when we'll send you the glasses. And if anyone has further questions about that, I know it's a little confusing, you can email me and I will be able to explain it a lot better. Oh, Don, I didn't even see you were on there. Those of you who are still here, definitely go check out that St. Louis Eclipse 2017 page. A lot of great information.
Right. Each city that's going to have the total eclipse is already preparing for an onslaught of tourism and how to do public events. So many of the cities across the country where the eclipse will be total, even if they're small towns, are going to have special events, and there'll be listings of these available. So if you are thinking yourself of going to the total eclipse, again, some of the most interesting groups and events are going to be listed at the Astro Society Eclipse Resource Guide. But if you have patrons who are interested in going, you might be able to refer to them to that list as well.
And one of the interesting outcomes of that is in Nashville, the Nashville Public Schools have closed. They declared that a holiday, 21st of August. So, you know, that could be some other things that might happen in your area. Keep in touch with what the schools are doing. And I see a question about where the panelists are going to be for the eclipse. Both Andy and I are going to be near Madras, Oregon. And hopefully not caught up in gridlock.
Hopefully not. I will be at the Valley of the Tetons Library in Idaho.
Ah, excellent.
Excellent. Well, I think we've gotten through all the questions and people are starting to disappear here. So again, thank you everyone for participating. We will get this archive up there within the next 24 hours or so, and please do join us on our future webinars. Thank you again, Andy and Dennis.
Well, thank you, Annie. Thanks for including us and doing the great work that you do with StarNet. It's a great resource, as Andy mentioned.
Great. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.